This is all 1,475 characters of the show One Piece, represented as a network. And here's Naruto, JoJo, Dragon Ball, and Bleach is here too, I guess. Today, we're going to talk about how I made these and see what we can learn from them. Because you see, I'm a huge sucker for power of friendship nonsense, that TV trope of main characters overcoming all the odds using the power of, well, their friendship.
Don't believe in yourself. Believe in me. Believe in the Kamina who believes in you.
What's that mean?
But which of these has the most power of friendship? Is that something we can quantify? Well, if there was one way to do it, it'd be through social networks, which is just a network that represents people and the relationships between them. But since I don't have any real friends, we'll have to settle for the next best thing: relationships between fictional characters in TV shows. So, in today's desperate attempt to justify watching so much anime in high school to my parents masquerading as an education video, we will break down the social networks for different TV shows to see how we can quantify the power of friendship and which of these has the highest power of friendship. While my Patreon subscribers are patient analyzing the psychosocial relationships of each pair of 1,400 characters in One Piece, might be pushing it. So, we need another approach. Let's use One Piece as a working example. First, I made a table with non-filler episodes listed horizontally and characters vertically. Then, using data from the fan wikis, I marked which characters appear in which episodes, which looks like this. This is called the character raster, and I think there's something neat about seeing some of my favorite shows and Bleach represented physically like this. But how do we use this to estimate the social network? Take these two. I've used cubes to mark the episodes characters appear in, but we can also think of these as lists of zeros and ones. A cube is a 1 and a lack of a cube is a 0. If we multiply the two lists episode by episode, we'll get a new list that has a cube only when both characters appear in the same episode. Counting the cubes in this new list will give us the total number of shared episodes, and that is going to be our relationship proxy. For example, Josuke and Koichi appear in 34 of 39 JoJo Part 4 episodes together, but Koichi and Giorno Giovanna appear in only one episode together, which gives us a sense of their relative friendship strengths. And that's it. Repeat that for every pair of characters to get the whole network. Simple and clean. Well, almost. First, see this triangular structure that the rasters have? Well, that's due to the serial nature of TV shows, and it's a bit of a pain. I did some math in order to account for this weird shape, which had the nice side effect of making all the friendship scores between 0 and 1, but these details aren't particularly interesting even for me, so check the description if you're a nerd. Second, you might have noticed that there's a lot of links here. If two characters appear even once in the same episode, they will get a relationship score. So, it might make sense to get rid of some of the weaker connections, but how do we choose a cutoff? Well, there's no one way to pick it, but here's what I did. Without a cutoff, each network is fully connected. If the cutoff is set too high, then the network will fragment into pieces, which doesn't really make sense. So there has to be a threshold just before the network splits apart, which is the one that I chose. The raw values for each series are on screen right now, though often it makes sense to display it as a percentage of links removed before the network broke up. Okay. Now that's it. That's how I made these networks. And look, again, I get it's not perfect. In the wise words of Bon Clay, true friendship isn't determined by time. But even still, in minutes, we can do something which would otherwise take months to do and require me to rewatch the long land arc of One Piece. But now that we have the networks, we can start answering some important questions. Like, which characters are best friends? Best Boy Josuke from JoJo Part 4 has a popularity score of 10.3. Miss Wednesday from One Piece, not the Addams Family, has a score of 20.6, and a 15.4 goes to the legend himself, Rock Lee, from Naruto. These popularity scores are all the individual friendship values added up for each character. But I've never been one for popularity contests, so let's take a look at some of the strongest friendships. For Rock Lee, that'd be these three characters: Nenji Hyuga, Ten, and Might Guy. Now, if you don't know, Naruto is, loosely speaking, a show about schools for ninja students. Each class has 3 students and 1 teacher, and that's exactly what we're seeing here. Rock Lee, Nenji, and Ten are all students of Might Guy. Which is great. It's always important to do a sanity check like this. Our method of building the network, while crude, is showing real and meaningful relationships that actually exist in the show. But let's take a look at perhaps the greatest friendship in all of anime, Sasuke and Naruto, the character this time. The actual plot of Naruto, the show, essentially revolves around the friendship of Naruto, the character, and Sasuke. So you'd think they'd have a really high friendship score. And it's not too bad. At 0.43, it's certainly decent, but nowhere near the highest in the network. A lot of that has to do with the fact that at a certain point in Naruto, the show, Sasuke leaves Naruto, the character, and it's not exactly on the best of terms. Which highlights a problem we have. Our networks don't tell us anything about how friendships might change over time. But that's not to say that they can't do that, and Naruto, the show, actually provides an easy way to do it, because what I've been calling Naruto is kind of a misnomer. It's 2 shows, technically 3, but I'm a millennial. There's Naruto the original series and Naruto Shippuden, which starts 2.5 years after Sasuke leaves. So, if we make a network for each series, we can compare what happens to the friendship strength before and after the time skip. For example, this simple plot shows the friendship of Naruto and Sasuke before the time skip and after the time skip. It's sad, but I'm sure they make up and shake hands like good friends in the end. If we wanted to look at general trends, we could do something like this instead. Plot the friendship scores before the time skip on the x-axis, and on the y-axis plot the friendships after the time skip. And this is what we get. Obviously, it's a lot to take in. There's something like 4,000 friendships being accounted for here. But we see an overall positive trend, meaning that on average, characters with strong friendships before the time skip tended to have strong friendships after the time skip as well. So hey, that's encouraging, right? Still though, splitting up each series would make this a nightmare of a video, but studying how networks change in time is a very important aspect of practical network theory, which is why I did want to show you that we can do it. Now, thinking about the never-ending flow of time and how it erodes friendships is fun and all, but if TV has taught me anything, it's that friendship is all about connectedness. Not just between 2 people, but between everyone. And luckily, there's quite a few different ways that we can put a number to that. For example, remember those cutoffs we found which showed the percentage of links removed just before the network broke? Well, one interpretation there would be that the harder that the network is to break, the stronger the power of friendship. Using this as a measure of the power of friendship, One Piece is the clear standout winner, which in all honesty is not that hard for me to believe. JoJo and Dragon Ball have by far the lowest power of friendship. To be honest, I don't know why Dragon Ball is like that, but JoJo is really interesting from a network point of view. Unlike the other shows, which are single continuous storylines, each of the 5 seasons of JoJo are effectively a new storyline. That's pretty apparent in the JoJo roster, but it's even more obvious when we look at it as a network. Each of the 5 seasons form groups of nodes that are more strongly connected between themselves than they are with the rest of the network, or if we wanted to be fancy, we'd say that the 5 seasons form 5 network communities. Okay, this is really bugging me. You see, according to Wikipedia, there are 5 seasons of JoJo, but I would have said that there's 6, 1 for each JoJo. I think that discrepancy comes from the fact that what I would call season 1 and 2 are very short. I made a poll to ask all of you about it, but I think the only conclusion I've come to is that it's not at all clear what a season is in JoJo. Keep in mind, half of these people voted apple juice is better than orange juice, so take their vote with a grain of salt. But I think it is interesting that the network itself views them as one community. I suspect that has a lot to do with the character REO Speedwagon, which, yes, that is a real name, but I'm still not sure. Anyway, I just wanted to get that off my chest. Back to the video. Again though, JoJo is a bit unique relative to the other shows. If we looked at Bleach instead, it's not entirely clear where the communities are, if there are any. In these situations, computer algorithms can help us detect communities, which here I've indicated by color, but it's certainly not as clear as it was in JoJo. And that's okay, not every network can be broken up into communities. Good thing that we can put a number to that. The modularity is just a number between 0 and 1 that quantifies how well a network can be broken up into communities. It's essentially a community score. 1 means that the network is very community, 0 means no communities. JoJo has a very high modularity score, the highest in fact at 0.77. Bleach, on the other hand, has a much lower modularity at 0.45. Now, I think modularity could be used as a power of friendship, but we have to be a bit careful because it's networks with low modularity that are the most tight-knit. For example, let's take the full JoJo network and break it up according to season, like we did with Naruto, and calculate the modularity for each. Compared to the total network, which had a modularity of 0.77, each season individually has a much lower modularity, and Part 4, confusingly Season 3, Diamond is Unbreakable, has by far the lowest. Part 4 also just so happens to be my favorite JoJo, and the one where, in my opinion, friendship thematically plays the biggest role, which I think motivates that low modularity should mean higher power of friendship. Because the modularity is always between 0 and 1, I think it makes sense to use something like 1 minus the modularity, essentially just flipping it. Going back to our 5 shows, this is how they'd rank for this power of friendship. Which, I mean, it worries me that Bleach scores the highest here. I feel like that would almost require me to watch it, but that's why we're considering multiple avenues here. Speaking of which, it takes only one link to go from Pirate Hunter Zoro to Monkey D. Luffy, but it'll take one more link to get from Zoro to Fire Fist Ace. So, in total, 2 links. But what's the longest path between any 2 characters in One Piece? Given that there are 1,475 characters in total, you might expect that number to be somewhat large. But it turns out it's only 5 hops. Weirdly short, right? The largest distance between any 2 nodes is called the network diameter, though I like to call it the thickness. In fact, all of the shows we are looking at have a thickness of either 4 or 5. Now, to be clear, I'm ignoring the friendship strength for this. In a weighted network, it's common to define the distance as 1 over the strength, and this is how the shows would rank. But this is much harder to interpret and compare with other networks. I mean, what does it mean that Shikaku is 6 emotional units of distance away from his son Shikamaru? That he should let Shikamaru win at shogi more often? Either way, what we're seeing here is a real-life phenomena equivalently known as either the 6 degrees of separation, the 6 degrees of Kevin Bacon, or the Sage of 6 Paths. That 6 is definitely wrong, but the general idea is still the same. The greatest distance between any 2 people on average is shockingly short. It truly is a small world after all. Or rather, it's a small world network, which is the name of the networks that have these really short distances. Apparently, network people have as much imagination as astronomers do when it comes to naming things. Now, proving something is a small world network is tricky, but there are some features that we would expect to see from them, so at the very least, we can check to see if our networks exhibit those properties. The first property is that small world networks have very short average distances across all pairs of characters. If this sounds like the thickness to you, then yeah, it's very similar. The network thickness is the extreme. It's the absolute largest, shortest path that you can find in the network. What we're interested in, though, is the shortest path averaged across all pairs in the network, not just the largest one. This is how the networks compare. Bleach has the shortest while JoJo has the largest, and each of them hover around 2. The second property that small world networks possess is a little less straightforward, but with the magic of being on the 8th version of this script, we've already actually kind of seen it. Small world networks have a lot of triangles. Let's go back to Zoro, Luffy, and Ace. It's a classic trio. Or rather, it would have been if Zoro had a direct connection to Ace, which he does not. It's essentially a failed trio. The clustering coefficient tells us how often these failed trios occur. A 1 means that every possible trio is filled in, while a 0 means that every possible trio is a failed one. This star network would be a good example of 0 clustering. Calculating the clustering coefficient using a program will get the following rankings. Here, Dragon Ball has the largest clustering, while One Piece has the smallest. Now, remember, small world networks have big clustering coefficients and small average path lengths, but what does big and small mean? Do our networks qualify? It's hard to say for certain, but we can compare against other common types of networks that we know are not small world. For example, this ring lattice network has the same number of nodes and links as our One Piece network, and it has similarly high clustering, meaning a lot of complete triangles, but its path lengths are much, much larger. On the other hand, randomly connected networks like this one tend to have small path lengths like our social networks, but with much fewer complete triangles. So while it's easy to meet one of the conditions of a small world network, it's actually pretty hard to have both small average path lengths and large clustering coefficients at the same time, which is what makes small world networks so special. Again, none of this is proof, but I think it is highly suggestive that our networks do exhibit small worldness, and I think it's fair if we use that as our final measures of the power of friendship. A small average distance means that characters are closer to each other, so the power of friendship should be proportional to 1 over that number. Small distance means big friendship, and vice versa. On the other hand, a large clustering coefficient means that we have more complete trios, so we'll say that the power of friendship should be directly proportional to the clustering coefficient. More trios, more friendship. Which means that we're finally ready to find which show has the most power of friendship. We have 4 different quantities that in some way reflect how close the characters are. The break cutoff, 1 minus the modularity, 1 over the average path length, and the clustering coefficient. Each of these, we've argued, is related to the power of friendship, but what we want is the power of friendship, just a single number. So let me propose to you, the internet, the official, not David, power of friendship. Yeah, just multiply all the things from before together. It's the simplest way to ensure that the power of friendship behaves in all the same ways that we would expect. So with this, let's finally do it. Which of these 5 has the highest power of friendship? Does this mean I have to watch Bleach? Your brain has a lot of neurons, all connecting and communicating with each other, meaning it's a network. But just like watching Bleach, it's both time-consuming and ethically dubious to go through a person's brain to follow each connection. For example, here's a real video recording of hundreds of neurons grown in a petri dish. Good luck finding which neurons are connected here, and this is the easy version. But if we keep track of when each neuron activated, which is, relatively speaking, much easier to do, we can use that activity to make a raster and find which neurons are best friends. That's right, I tricked you. Here you thought this video was about anime, and the whole time I've been pulling the wool over your eyes like a green screen in an H-Bomber Guy video. This is actually an education video. Because everything that we've done so far is pretty much what I do for a living. I mean, except for the anime part. Just like the more often 2 characters appearing together suggests they're better friends, the more that 2 neurons activating together suggests they're wired together. Or at least that's the assumption. And it doesn't have to be neurons either. Oftentimes it isn't. Magnetic resonance imaging machines, or MRIs, allow us to see people's entire brains, and often without committing a single crime. Here's activity recorded by an MRI from just one brain region. It's not zeros and ones like it was before. It goes up and down over time. I should emphasize though, MRIs can't resolve individual neurons. They don't have that kind of resolution. This is more like several million neurons all acting together. But MRIs are one of the few ways that we can scan a whole brain all at once, which is really useful. If we include all the regions, we can organize them into a raster-esque plot just like we had before. Okay, sorry, I want to interrupt here because I don't think I've made it very clear just how much what we're doing here is the exact same as before. All of these are real signals from different parts of a real brain. They are exactly like the characters in our previous rasters, the only difference being that 1, we don't get that weird triangular shape, and 2, they aren't zeros and ones like before. But mathematically, none of that matters. The only reason I'm plotting them like this instead of like we did before is just because there's so much data, it was hard to plot it all at once while still allowing you to see some of the structure. And I guess, while I have you here, by chance, I remembered I happen to have a Matt Parker-esque example to really drive what we're doing here home. Last year, I took this recording of our Christmas tree. It's a bit hard to see, but there's actually different kinds of lights here. But we can do a little bit of a video editing trick. Take the video, duplicate it, slide it back a bit, and subtract them. That's actually what I did with the neurons that we saw before. This really lets you see the different patterns happening. The bulbs that flash together belong together, which is exactly what our method is looking for. The more neurons flash together, the more likely it is that they belong together, but it's not necessarily true. Anyway, back to the video. If we include all the regions, we can organize them into a raster-esque plot just like we had before. And just like in our anime relationship network, the more similar 2 signals are, the stronger we'll assume their connection is. This is the network of brain region interaction. Because of this, we call these functional networks to emphasize it has more to do with brain function than brain structure. All of the networks that we've been looking at today were functional networks. I mean, so long as you disregard fusion characters in Dragon Ball, Zetsu, and Naruto, and it's a good thing we weren't talking about Full Metal Alchemist. The functional network also depends on how we estimate it. Our method of just looking at how similar 2 signals are is by far the most basic, but for you nerds out there, I recommend taking a look at more advanced methods like partial correlation, Granger causality, and transfer entropy. I just think those are cool names. That's really the only reason I get that in the script. Regardless of how we do it, once we have the functional network, we can do a lot of the same things that we did before. For example, we can do community detection just like we did for JoJo and Bleach. On the left, I have the communities that I found, and on the right are the known brain regions for comparison. Here's the community that processes auditory information, and this community is the visual cortex that lets you visualize things. And here's the part of the brain where my imposter syndrome likely exists. As you can see, our community detection is actually doing a pretty good job, better than I was expecting it to. We can also test for small worldness. I found the average path length to be 2.5 while the clustering coefficient was 0.5, which is very similar to what we saw in our social networks. It turns out small worldness makes moving information around a network much more efficient, and there is evidence suggesting that brains are in fact small world networks. And remember how we looked at networks changing over time? Well, we can do that here too. The network I just showed you was made while the subject was just laying their head empty, #relatable. But if we instead ask the subject to try to remember something, the network changes. And, just like we did for pre- and post-time skip Naruto, we can plot the link strengths during rest on the horizontal and during the memory task on the vertical. By looking at which points are furthest from the diagonal line, we can begin to understand which brain regions are interacting more or less, and how that relates to memory. Of course, that's a change that occurs on the timescale of seconds. We can also think about more long-term changes, which allows us to ask some really cool questions. Like, how does Shikamaru's brain network change as he learns to play shogi in order to defeat his dad? Or do Goku's poor choices in Dragon Ball Super reflect structural damage due to repeated hits to the head? How does Chopper's functional network change between raccoon dog form and human form? And does the cognitive load of being a shonen protagonist increase your predisposition to the color orange? All very important questions, and what I think is cool is that using the exact same tools that we learned about in this very video about the power of friendship in anime, you already know the basics of how to approach those problems. But maybe the brain isn't your jam, and that's cool too. I mean, that's kind of the point of this video. Maybe you want to study how information moves around the internet, or how electricity goes around a power grid, or maybe you don't care about any of that and you just want to know who are the best friends in your favorite TV shows. And maybe you now find yourself learning about something you otherwise might never have had an interest in, and if that's the case, I've accomplished my goal with this video. You can have your Naruto-shaped cake and eat it too. I hope if nothing else that this video has shown you that you don't always need to separate the two. Now, I consider myself fairly lucky that I can take the things that I do for a living and make it into a stupid video about anime, and if you've made it this far into the video, there's a good chance you're probably looking for something similar. A job that's interesting, rewarding, and maybe something that can do some good in the world. No promises on the anime though. Normally, I don't take sponsors because I don't feel comfortable trying to sell you something. Luckily, today's sponsor isn't trying to sell you anything. Everything they offer is free. That's because 80,000 Hours is a non-profit whose goal is just to find you a rewarding job. Well, okay, it's not just that. You see, 80,000 Hours also focuses on ways to address some of the biggest problems in the world, like how to make sure that AI goes well, preventing global pandemics and nuclear apocalypses, amongst other things. And one of the best ways to do that is to put skilled people like you into positions where they can do some good. So to achieve that goal, everything they do is free for you. They have a bunch of online resources like an extensive career guide to help you figure out which jobs are the right ones for you, a research section on some of the most urgent problems in the world that need addressing, and most amazingly to me, a really cool job board where you can look for jobs, sort by area, experience, education, and so on, and you don't even need to sign up for anything to use it. They also have a free newsletter so that you can get updates when new job opportunities come up and stay up to date with research that they've been doing. So if this is something that sounds interesting to you, check out the link in the description or go to 80,000hours.org/notdavid to let them know that I sent you and start job hunting.